It's November 1994 in Manhattan, New York. Tupac Shakur's trial is underway. Due to an arrest back in 1993, him and his manager, Charles Fuller, are being accused of sexual abuse, sodomy, and illegal possessions of a firearm. 4 people were accused, but they only managed to arrest 3. In strange events, the third man arrested, named Haitian Jack, had his case separated from Tupac's and Fuller's, which they thought was strange. With the trial underway, at this point, both the prosecution and defense have laid out their cases, with most people at trial feeling Tupac was innocent with no real evidence of the accusations, including no DNA or signs of any abuse on the victim. Not to mention they also had a confession from the victim that she had consensual relations with Tupac a few days prior to the alleged incident, with her coming on to him after being introduced by his mysterious co-defendant, Haitian Jack, making some people feel that she was doing this as a money grab since a civil suit was also filed. According to witnesses of the trial, you got the feeling he was a man of the people, with a lot of fans in attendance and outside the courtroom showing him support. However, the Love Star's freedom now lay in the hands of a group of jurors. It started with 7 women and 3 men, and 2 jurors were dismissed by the judge due to their dislike for Tupac coming to light. One of the jurors, named Richard, did an interview and provided some surprising details most people don't know about the trial and what the jurors actually went through. So we'll start with Richard, who was selected by jury duty, and we will assign him as juror number 1. He describes juror 2 as an older senile woman who didn't understand or cared, quoting, "She just wanted to hurry up and vote so she could move to her condo in Florida, and she was fine with voting the majority regardless." Other jurors felt she wasn't fit to be one, like juror 3, who was a young woman. She was engaged, nice, and very friendly. She would often remind Richard that juror 2 is senile and not fit to be a juror. Juror 4 was a black pastor in his late 30s who was also Richard's roommate while they were sequestered. He mostly stayed to himself with a calm demeanor. He was much involved following the case and posed some great questions whenever they needed to discuss a topic. He seemed more reserved and not involved in the hip-hop culture, had a more conservative point of view, especially living a disciplined religious lifestyle. Juror 5 was a young 21-year-old college girl attending NYU who was friendly but shy. She felt the case was ridiculous, that the victim knew what she was doing with Tupac. It felt he had nothing to do with what those other men might have done that fateful night. Since the victim never even claimed Tupac's manager touched her, she would often ask, why is he even being tried? She felt that way throughout the trial. Now, juror 6 was the oldest out of the group, and according to Richard, was a force to be reckoned with, and not in a good way. Even during the jury selection, you could tell she really wanted to be selected, making sure she gave all the right answers when being questioned in her interview. She was retired, never married, and a devout right-wing Roman Catholic. Very conservative and religious. Appears to have never had any relations with the opposite sex. A direct quote from Richard, she appeared to be frozen in the 1940s. Juror 7 was a lady in her late 20s. She was very vocal and stood up for Tupac and would not hesitate to argue her points with the older ladies who seemed to have other agendas outside of the case. And juror 8 was a woman in her early 30s who wasn't uptight as the older woman and usually stood up for today's younger generation's influences. Immediately, once deliberation began, they were surprised how juror 6, the oldest, made the most effort to take over the case, even sitting in the middle of the table and trying to control most of the conversations, even though she was not appointed the jury foreman. And according to Richard, her view of the trial was, here's this poor girl. He was her idol. He was her star. He was her guiding light. She looked up to him and respected him and wanted to get married. But this is how he betrayed her. And she refused to change her mind in any way. Even juror 8 tried to tell her people actually have casual sex just to hook up without any plans of getting married. But the older lady didn't want to hear that, feeling this girl was an angel who would only have done it if Tupac convinced her they would be getting married. In deliberation, they went over each charge, all agreeing immediately to dismiss the weapon charges, and actually felt the cops might have planted them because the ones used as evidence were different colors than the ones described in reports. Also, everyone agreed that they could tell the cops strangely had it out for Tupac. Even the arresting officers that testified did not come off as credible, more like a motive against Tupac. They were also surprised that the officers basically admitted to stalking Tupac whenever he was in New York. It was obvious they were out to get him for something, how they hounded him all over town, which seemed odd to them all, especially how the arresting officers kept bringing up Tupac's case in Atlanta with the incident involving 2 off-duty cops. And if you wanted to know what happened with that situation in Atlanta, make sure to watch this video where we did a deep dive with some surprising details. Now back to this story. Deliberation became a tedious process to the jurors, minute by minute, hour by hour, where they were leading towards a hung jury, even writing a note to the judge explaining they are having a difficult time coming to a decision and wanted to know how a hung jury would work. The judge just wrote back to keep going until you do have a verdict. So they did. The first day, most were leaning towards not guilty, except for one, which was juror 6, who voted guilty every time. With them unable to come to an overall decision, they ended the day heading back to their hotel rooms. The jurors were being held in a not so nice hotel and were not allowed to have any TVs, phone access, or newspapers, completely shut off from the outside world and surrounded by guards 24/7. Now on day 2, most of the jury still felt Tupac was not guilty of the charges. At the least, he wasn't even present in the room when the alleged assault took place. They were close to coming to an agreement again of not guilty, except juror 6, who would not let go of her feelings that the alleged victim was an angel who was brutally attacked. She was very vocal about her opinions, trying to persuade the other jurors, even convincing a few like the senile old juror to consider guilty, and she was on board if the majority would vote the same. Unfortunately, the day ended without another decision, and everyone went back to spend another night at the rundown hotel rooms. On day 3, they were all called to appear in court for a hearing, and to their surprise, once they were all seated, the judge looked over to them and said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would like to instruct you that the defendant will be arriving shortly, and you are to make no inferences whatsoever about his appearance. You do not discuss his appearance afterward when you deliberate as well. To remember, his appearance has nothing to do with the events that occurred during what he's accused of." Looking confused, they all agreed, letting the judge know they understood. Then shortly after, everyone was shocked when Tupac entered the courtroom, being pushed in a wheelchair, leaving most of the jury startled, wondering what happened. His head and left hand was completely wrapped in bandages. He was obviously in pain from his injuries, leaving the jury to wonder what could have happened to him. Some of them even believed, with how much the cops seemed to dislike him, that they might have been behind his injuries. The trial proceedings for the day went on, but after break, Tupac did not return due to his leg becoming numb, and his whereabouts were not reported any further. The jury went back to deliberation to see if they could come to a final verdict. Despite Tupac's condition, they did not let it affect their decisions with the current case and stuck by the evidence at hand. And again, everyone was on board with the not guilty, or at least a hung jury, except for juror 6, who was the main one causing the verdict to be delayed. Frustrated, Richard spoke to the group saying, "This is ridiculous and it's not going anywhere. We can't make a decision, so let's just say a hung jury." They all looked at each other. Everyone agreed. That's when juror 6 quickly stood up, telling everyone to wait. She asked, "Does this mean he will be set free? Is that what you people want? He's got thug life written on his stomach. You want someone like that roaming the streets?" She went on with a speech about how other women will be victimized and the message it sends to younger people, saying the details of this case are irrelevant and how the message it will give is more important, making it clear she will not allow a hung jury. Upset, juror 7 sat up, calling out her bias for Tupac, saying she was being difficult and unfair. She would not go along with convicting a man that she felt by evidence was not guilty, feeling the alleged victim was a groupie and agreed she was assaulted, but it wasn't by Tupac. Most of the other jurors did not want to go any further, and that's when juror 6 approached them with a suggestion. She said to them, "There's this 4th-degree sexual assault thing because we know something did happen to her that night." They decided to look into it further, finding an example of 4th-degree sexual assault as simply being if you put hands non-consensually on someone at a bar, basically non-consensual groping. That's 4th-degree sexual assault. Juror 7 decided to compromise, asking to know if it was a lesser charge, what kind of time would that bring Tupac? So they sent another note to the judge asking what kind of a conviction would 4th-degree sexual assault be. And the judge wrote back that he couldn't talk about sentencing or the potential, and for them to focus only on the facts of the case and to make their decision. With it already taken 3 full days, and knowing Juror 6 would not budge on anything less than a conviction, Juror 2 being senile, seemingly on teams with Juror 6, they decided on a conviction. They dismissed charges that in their eyes would have warranted jail time for Tupac. Though some still upset, they agreed to the one charge of 4th-degree sexual assault, documenting in the case Tupac forcefully touched her buttocks. Exhausted, they let the bailiff know to tell the judge they've reached a verdict. So on day 3, with everyone in the court except for Tupac, who was still recovering in a nearby hospital, the jury read their decision for the weapon charges and sodomy that could lead to 25 years in prison, and they announced not guilty, but guilty for sexual abuse, leaving some onlookers and all of Tupac fans shocked by the verdict. They gave the same conviction to his manager as well. Though it wasn't a complete victory, Tupac's attorneys and others felt it was a victory because the other charges dismissed carried much heavier sentencing, which could have resulted in 25 years, and the charge he received should only warrant probation, they felt. But on sentencing day, almost 2 months later, with Tupac now in attendance for his final sentencing, they started first with the victim on the stand, expressing her emotions and how she felt betrayed by him. And while she was speaking, they noted Tupac stared intently at her while on stand. And when she finished, he stood up with tears in his eyes, looked directly at her, and said, "I apologize. I'm not apologizing for a crime. I hope in time you come forth and tell the truth that I'm innocent," and sat back down. Next, the judge gave his final words, stating, "This was an act of brutal violence by Shakur against a helpless woman." As he continued, you got the feeling he was portraying him as some animal. And Tupac, with a look of despair, stood up to address the judge and said the following, "You know, Your Honor, I mean this with no disrespect, but throughout this entire court case, you haven't looked me or my attorney in the eye once. You never used the wisdom of Solomon. It's obvious you're not here in the search for justice. So therefore, there's no point in me asking for a lighter sentence. I don't care what you do because you're not respecting us. This is not a court of law. As far as I'm concerned, no justice is being served here, and you still can't look me in the eye. So I say, do what you want to do. Give me whatever time you want, because I'm not in your hands. I'm in God's hands." And to the youth, I got so involved in my career that I didn't see this coming. I have no shame. I don't feel shame. Leaving everyone stunned in the courtroom. It was such a moving moment. Randomly, a young lady ran up on Tupac in front of the courtroom, draped over his back, leaning over the railing, and kissed him on his cheek. She was quickly ordered back to her seat. The judge went on to sentence him 1 to 4.5 years in prison, and his manager, Fuller, 4 months in jail with 5 years probation. Everyone, including most of the jury, was shocked by the harsh sentencing for such a minor charge, especially after having the other charges dismissed. The cops walked up, placed the cuffs on Tupac, and took him away to start serving his time. Regardless, if you believe he was guilty or innocent, I wanted to bring to life what actually happened from one of the jurors' observations in an interview. I have down in the description an article on the topic. Make sure you support the other videos on the channel, and I appreciate everyone for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more.